thank you to everyone who came along this evening. It's lovely to be back in Bristol. I actually was first in Bristol speaking at the Green Party conference about 3 days after I'd been elected as leader. And I said then that it felt like a very green city and a city in which Greens could feel right at home. And I arrived today, and outside is Bristol East Greenpeace with their anti-fracking protest. And I felt right at home all over again. I have to say that I also feel very at home on this platform because I find myself in a very familiar position. Not that of being the radical in the room, although that's the common position that I occupy, but of being the only woman on the panel. And you might like to reflect for the second that the representation on this panel reflects the representation of women in Parliament. And that's something we might want to do something about. But the question we're focusing on this evening is, will we get the greenest government ever in 2015? Well, there's one very clear answer to that question, which is we certainly can't get a less green government than the one we've got now. The phrase, the greenest government ever, is now a very sad, very sick joke. And I can point to a few things. As Jonathan asked, I'm going to mostly focus forwards, but I'm going to point to a few things that Mr. Barker are very much not fluff. These are issues of this government pursuing this fracking fantasy, the myth that somehow we'll get cheap gas from fracking, the myth that we know that there's any frackable gas there, when the chief of Quadrilla says we'll know in 5 years if there's frackable gas in Britain. This is the government that ranks 25th out of 27 European countries in terms of the amount of energy we get from renewables. But don't worry, we're ahead of Malta and Luxembourg. We've got a situation we have, and this refers to this month. David Cameron was asked by Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, will you commit to going to the summit of world leaders in New York in September to talk about climate change to really get world action back on track? His short answer, if you cut through the fluff, was no, he would not commit in a question asked in Parliament this month. We have a government that hates red tape, so it wants to cut building standards so that the quality of our housing in terms of energy efficiency, already some of the worst in Western Europe, we're building houses that are going to immediately need treatment to bring them up to any kind of decent standard, to any sort of chance of people living in them not suffering fuel poverty. And then there's the natural world. This is the greenest government ever that wants to build all over the green belt. And this is the greenest government ever that has basically ignored the desperately identified need to protect our marine environment. Now, that's not the greenest government ever, but we have got, since 2010, something unique in Parliament. We have had in Parliament, for the first time, a Green MP, Caroline Lucas. And I think whether it's her bill, her private member's bill, now before Parliament, do ask your MP if they're backing it to renationalise the railways and bring them back into public hands, whether it's all of the other issues in terms of energy conservation that she's been fighting on. And that also means that you have an MP in Parliament who was arrested for standing up for her principles, not arrested for fiddling her expenses or other unfortunate matters. And The Guardian worked this out, and they said it's 25 years since an MP was last arrested for standing up for their principles. And if we're looking forward, thinking about the future, we can look towards the election in 2015 and say that what we certainly can do is elect an even more green parliament. We can elect more green MPs, as we've just elected our first green MEP here in the southwest. And perhaps one of the next green MPs will also be here when you look at the results from Bristol West and see that we got more votes in the local elections here this year than any other party. But let's think about what this hopefully greenest government ever in 2015 looks like. I'm going to run through very quickly, I haven't got a lot of time, a whole range of policy issues because green, it's about a lot more than energy policy, important as that is. So I'm going to talk about energy, climate change, transport, agriculture, and our natural world. And to start on energy, I'm going to start with the Cinderella part of energy, the bit that everyone just kind of tacks on at the end usually as a final, oh yeah, and we'll do that too. And that's energy conservation. And I talked about how we've got some of the worst quality of housing in Western Europe. And what we're supporting is a scheme like the Energy Bill Revolution, put forward like by charities and NGOs and the unions. And it's the idea that we take the money the government gets in carbon taxes and use that to insulate, provide energy efficiency measures for every home that needs it. And what you can do by doing that is you can lift 9 out of 10 households out of fuel poverty, that huge pressing problem that's affecting so many people. And you can create up to 200,000 jobs. And you can cut carbon emissions. To describe that as an absolute no-brainer policy, as opposed to this government's dreadful Green Deal designed by the finance industry for the finance industry, that kind of financial innovation that you were talking about. That's the kind of thing we need to give everyone a warm, comfortable, affordable to heat home. And then, in terms of energy, of course we need to go right ahead with renewable energy. No fracking, no nuclear. Let's focus on the energy that is our future. And think about the ownership of that. Rather than the big 6 energy companies, let's work really hard to encourage community ownership of local schemes to generate renewable energy. I've seen all kind of wonderful schemes up and down the country, and they've happened pretty well despite the government. And yes, the government now has finally recently introduced a plan for this, enough plan that by 2020 they can fund 9 schemes a year. Okay, moving on from energy policy, I get on to climate change. And this is where what we're saying, what we're achieving, is simply not nearly good enough. We have a melting West Antarctic ice shelf where we've just had the 3rd warmest May on record. We're probably heading into what will be a hideous El Nino weather event. We had the floods that affected so many people in the southwest over Christmas and the New Year. Climate change is a clear and present reality. And what the Green Party says is our next government has to commit to having greenhouse gas emissions 10% of 1990 levels by 2030. It's a big change, but it's where we need to be. And what we need to do is transform our economy in terms of, quite simply, the amount of stuff we use, the amount of stuff we throw away, the amount of energy we put into making that stuff. And then transport, an absolutely critical part of how we think about green policy. And this government basically has it all utterly upside down, and I'm afraid the Labor Party is really no different. Policy about transport has to start with active transport, walking and cycling, getting people around their local communities safely and comfortably, with, of course, all the benefits of the potentially reduced NHS bill as well. And that means absolutely no to HS2, which is a rich person's high-energy railway. What we need to do instead is invest in all of the low-speed ones that we have around the country. And I'm sure some people in this room could give me some great examples. I have a long list because I've travelled on most of them over the past 18 months. And no to new road building. Most of the road schemes this government has introduced were dismissed as zombie schemes back in the 80s, when we worked out that building a new road, what it basically does is it either creates more traffic or moves the traffic jam to a new place. New roads are not the answer. Affordable, reliable public transport, good local buses, good local trains, trains going east-west across the country and linking bits that don't link into London, that's what we need for transport policy.
Natalie, are you keeping an eye on the little sign over here?
No, I can't even see the little sign.
Which says finish.
It says finish. All right, okay. Well, there's no light on the
there?
sign, so all right, I'm going to dash through the rest of it. Agriculture and food. I was interested in what George said in terms of local food. We need to restore the ring of market gardens around our towns and cities and get away from the dominance of supermarkets. In our natural world, we've got to protect the green belt and protect our marine environment. We had a Royal Commission in 2004 that said 30% of our seas should be no-take zones. We have virtually no seas now that are no-take zones, and we've got this horribly depleted environment that we're still hacking away at. So I'm going to finish with a brief conclusion, because what I've laid out there is a massive transformation. As Jonathan indicated, the fact is that we have to utterly have big changes, not piddling little reforms. But we've got an economy at the moment where 1 in 5 workers is on less than a living wage. We have 900,000 youth unemployed. We've got 1 million workers, at least, on 0 hours contract. And we have a recovery, an economic recovery, built on consumer debt and a house price bubble. What could possibly go wrong? The fact is, we have to transform our economy for the sake of our environment and for the sake of our people. And we can do both of those together and build a better world that works for the common good, not just for the few.